Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Green Action Center's Composting and Recycling Myths webinar. My name is Kristen Malik, and I am one of the co-compost program coordinators at Green Action Center, and I will be your host and moderator today. And as you can see here, we have three other lovely faces on the screen right now, and they will be the panelists for today's webinar. This is the third webinar in our compost and food waste webinar series that we've been hosting all this week. We have one left tonight at 7 p.m., which is we'll be showing you how to build two different types of wooden compost bins. So it's going to be really fun. Don't miss out. If you would like more information about it or would like to register, you can go to Green Action Center's website, greenactioncenter.ca. And if you missed out on our two previous webinars earlier on in the week, we had Spotlight on Compost Winnipeg and Cooking with Food Scraps. You can check out the videos on Green Action Center's Facebook page on the videos tab. So the reason we're hosting our webinar series this week is because it's National Waste Reduction Week. It's an annual event held in Canada, and it's been going on for 20 years now already. The week is a way to celebrate and encourage waste reduction efforts. And if you want to find out more information about the week, you can, or find out about other events that are going on throughout Canada. That's what's great about all of these online webinars, is you can see lots of different events happening all throughout Canada. You can check out their website at wrwcanada.com. And of course, I would like to say a big thank you to the City of Winnipeg for supporting this webinar series. Without their funding support, we wouldn't be able to offer these webinars for free. So thank you to that. All right, before we begin the presentation, I would like to begin by acknowledging that Green Action Center is located in Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. The water we drink comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation on Treaty 3 territory. We respect the treaties that were signed and recognize that harms and mistakes have been made. We know reconciliation is a journey that requires dialogue and action, and we are focusing on learning how to practice reconciliation in our everyday work at Green Action Center. Okay, and with that, I'm excited to have our three panelists here with us today to address the uncertainties and myths surrounding composting and recycling. So Leah Cote is my co-compost program coordinator at Green Action Center, and she will be addressing all the questions and myths surrounding composting. And then Colleen Ans, she is the Living Green, Living Well coordinator at Green Action Center, and she will be covering composting, or not composting, myths surrounding recycling. And there's always lots of questions surrounding those as well. And just for a little background about Green Action Center and what we do, we're an environmental nonprofit organization based in Winnipeg. We focus on helping people learn how to live greener lifestyles through education and advocating for policy change. So our three main focus areas are sustainable transportation, waste reduction, and composting. And our third panelist, I'm excited to say, is Sarah Wallace from Multi-Material Stewardship Manitoba, or MMSM. If you're not familiar with MMSM, they are a nonprofit industry-funded organization. So manufacturers, retailers, and organizations that supply packaging and printed paper to Manitobans, they actually have to pay fees on these materials to MMSM. And these fees help MMSM to fund and provide support for the province's residential recycling programs for packaging and printed paper. So Sarah is here as our recycling expert. And if she'll answer her questions your questions as best as she can. And we asked on social media for folks to send in questions about recycling, and we got some really good ones. So I'm excited to cover those. And please feel free to ask questions during the webinar. We'd love to get more questions. If you're watching on Zoom, just type your questions in the chat box. And if you're watching on Facebook, type your questions in the comment box on the video. And if we don't have time to answer throughout the webinar, we will have a Q&A afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Leah to your screens to start things off.
Great, thanks, Kristen. I'll just share my screen now. Okay, like Kristen mentioned, I'm going to be diving into the composting side of things today to go more into detail about things that, questions that we have about composting more specifically. So there we go. So just a quick overview. It's going to be very, very general, but what is composting? Composting in general, it's the process of breaking down living organic matter by a community of microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, worms, and lots of friendly bugs. And the work that they do breaking that down frees up valuable nutrients that are essential for plant growth and development, and that those nutrients are the compost. Generally, we do a much longer presentation about composting, but I just wanted to quickly clarify what I mean before I dive into what can you compost. So just like us, the bacteria and worms and bugs, they have two essential food groups. We have more than two. Ours are a little more complicated, but theirs are simple. They just need greens and browns. Now, what are greens and browns? Greens are typically wet, they're high in nitrogen, and they include things like fruit and veggie scraps, tea bags, garden waste, fresh grass clippings, so on and so forth. And browns are equally essential. Browns are typically dry, brown in color, and they're very high in carbon for them. So these include things like dry leaves, sawdust, straw, wood chips, shredded paper. Yeah. So generally, we encourage people to put in twice as many browns as they do greens, just because that is the perfect balance for them. But a lot of time people may be a little unsure of what they can and can't add. So I just wanted to clarify things today about what can you actually compost and what can't you. And everything that I'm going to be discussing is for your backyard bin. So if you're doing composting on site or at a community bin, these are for those bins. Now, why we sort of wanted to sort of myth bust here is there's a lot of things that people may not know that you can actually compost. Generally, we just tell people stay away from dairy, but eggshells are the exception to that. You can compost eggshells. Wood ash, you can also compost. I would say, I want to clarify wood ash and not coal ash. And when you're adding wood ash, I would recommend to do so sparingly, because even though you can compost it, it's very basic, and it can overload the compost system. It's very high in potassium as well, so that's a lot of good nutrients for it, but add that sparingly, though you can add it. Same with, you can add plain rice, plain pasta, bread, even moldy bread, it's totally fine. Hair, your own hair, if you take it out of the hairbrush, toss it into your compost bin. If you give your pet a COVID haircut, you can put that fur in the compost bin. Nail clippings as well. Another thing that people may not know is rabbit or bird droppings, because generally people think just stay away from pet droppings, but rabbit and bird droppings are fine to add into the compost bin. Stale spices and pet food treats and dog food, as well as beer, wine, and pop. Now, more generally on the brown sides of things, you can also add cotton balls, tissues, and natural fiber clothing. So if you have an item that is 100% cotton or wool, you can actually toss that into the compost bin and it will break down in there. If you have dryer lint or things from your vacuum bag, if you just collect it and you don't have a closed bag, that can be put in. I do want to say, if you are vacuuming or if you are washing a lot of items with synthetic materials, if your rug, your vacuuming is very synthetic, or if your towels or clothing, I generally stay away from putting that in, because there's a lot of smaller fibers that will break down and may contaminate your compost. But generally, if you have, like I said before, natural fiber clothing or materials, with the lint or with your vacuuming, you can toss that in. And lastly, wine corks and beeswax candles. Very random list, but they're very uncommon things that you may not have known. And then I just quickly wanted to review what not to compost, just so that we're clear on what can and can't go into the compost bin. Generally, because I mentioned we're talking about your backyard bin, it doesn't get to the high temperatures we're talking about on in large scale composting. So we say to not add in meat products, so bones, that sort of thing, fats. No eggs, I mentioned that with the eggshells, or dairy, and to not add any oily foods. This is due to a few reasons. Not only will this add extra smell to your compost bin, but these can cause or leave pathogens that just can't be broken down in the temperatures in your backyard bin. They just don't get hot enough. And the smells could also attract unwanted friends to your bin. So just don't add those. Other things to not add: dog and cat waste. I mentioned that in the last slide, but this is also due to pathogens. I'd stay away from diseased plants. For example, if your tomato plant has blight, don't add that into your bin. It won't break down, and you may end up contaminating your garden next year if you put the compost back into your garden. And then, because these are living beings, just like us, don't add in plastic, metal, or synthetics. We don't eat it, they don't want to eat it. So speaking about plastic products, I wanted to sort of dive into the topic of compostable plastics. So when you order a takeout, some takeout food, or you get something in a compostable package, they might have a variety of terms on there. Could say compostable, biodegradable packaging, or this plastic is made from plants. Could even say oxo-degradable, bio-based plastic, bio-PET. There's a variety of terms. So I wanted to dive into these a little bit more because more and more we're seeing these, and we might be confused about adding them to our own bins. So I wanted to clear that up today. So obviously, just looking at the variety of terms I presented there, compostable plastics can actually be very confusing, and I'm going to explain they're not all created equal. The terms that I threw out there, they sound really green to the consumer, but what you might not know is that each of those mean different things. So I'll get into that more in the next slide. But the other thing is that compostable plastics are not strictly regulated. Biodegradable plastics were actually introduced in the late 1980s. And so this really brought about a big amount of confusion and skepticism about these claims and product performance of these so-called biodegradable plastics. And even though they were said to be environmentally friendly back then, these products actually didn't biodegrade as they were expected. But companies still kept putting them on their products, claiming this, even though there were no scientifically based test methods and standards that actually existed back then. So ever since 2002, these tests and specifications have existed, and now you can scientifically prove that a material will biodegrade, leaving no persistent synthetic residues. So there's two standards that you can use to test. And the Biodegradable Products Institute, or BPI, is your best resource to go to for learning more about this. But they've created a certification process for these products specifically, and they have a logo that companies that abide by this can put on their products to sort of clear up and clarify that their products actually do what they say they do. So what are the different types of compostable plastics? I put that in quotation because this is what these are what they claim. And I'm going to clarify each term here. So biodegradable, maybe it says biodegradable on the bottom. Well, that sounds great, but it actually doesn't mean a whole lot. There's really no standard for what this term actually means. So just like saying natural, it's too vague, it's too general. So whether it's bio-based or otherwise, there's actually a chemical additive that's added in to these plastic products that helps speed up the breakdown. And by speed up, it actually means a time span of about a decade, as opposed to dozens or even hundreds of years. So they're actually likely to just break down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. So they're just going to end up as microplastic. That's generally what biodegradable means. Oxo-degradable is very close to biodegradable. It just means that they use oxygen to break down these a lot faster. So they need a condition where oxygen is present. So they still are made from fossil fuels, and they still produce microplastics. Now, bio-PET is generally chemically actually identical to plastic and to fossil fuel-based plastic, but it actually uses molecules derived from plants or food waste, that sort of thing. And the only difference between plastic and this bio-PET is the ethanol was used to create them. It's a plant-based, basically. So because they're identical, they take just as long as plastic to break down. And when they break down, they're going to break down into microplastic. And then lastly, compostable or fully compostable. Once again, it's too vague. What does it break down to? Where is the standard for that? So now these are the type of compostable plastics you want to look for. So PLA or polylactic acid, this is the most common compostable plastic that's used today. So it, under the right conditions, polylactic acid breaks down into carbon dioxide, water, and compost, and it does not produce microplastics. In theory, you could recycle PLA, but almost no recycling programs accept it. The market to buy it and the facilities to recycle it just don't exist. And I'll explain this more in a minute. There's also another term, EcoFlex. So EcoFlex it's a biodegradable polyester that is certified compostable and made by a specific company. You might be more familiar with it. It's like a starch blend in more of like grocery bag form, stating that they're made from cornstarch, though they can be used in other products as well. And PHA, or polyhydroxyl alkanoates, long-term, PHA is a great short form. These also exist, but they're mainly used for medical purposes, but they're still certified compostable. So they're used in sutures or cardiovascular patches. That's their main uses. So when these products are certified compostable by BPI, in order for them to be considered that, they have to break down within a specific time frame. So most facilities need them to break down in 80 days or less. And so all these materials biodegrade at a rate comparable to yard waste or food scraps. And then they also must not disintegrate into any sort of plastic fragments too. So what's going on now? What's the issue with compostable plastics? Why am I diving into this? Why am I bringing this up? Especially with recycling and our compost bins. Well, the reason is they're actually not designed for our home compost system. They're actually tested for large-scale commercial compost systems because they get much hotter and they're more carefully managed than our own backyard bins. So when we use them and we give them to these compost systems, we need them to break down under high heat and a lot of oxygen. So they can't go in your home bin, but if you have a compost pickup service, they can go in that, and I'll explain that more in a second. The other issue with compostable plastics or products is that many municipalities, especially smaller ones, they don't actually have access to compost systems that can handle these products. So those products you paid extra for, they're just going to actually end up going to the landfill where they sit in there, they break into methane, and they release that gas into the atmosphere. So it's important to find a proper end of use for these items, which I will give you a solution for. But it's really, yeah, that's key to keep in mind. Where are these going to end up, even though we've actually put a lot of time and effort into getting them? And lastly, even if commercial composting facilities do exist, a lot of places still struggle to accept them. There's a variety of reasons. They can look like non-compostable plastics, and so it can be difficult to sort them out. Or maybe the facilities are mainly designed to deal with leaf and yard waste, like our current one at Brady, and they're not really set up for compostable plastics. The other thing is, if there's a lot of compostable bags, they tend to blow away when you're turning them or when you're adding them into them. They end up just like a lot of litter. So there's a lot of issues, but there's some hope. So what do we want to do at the end of the day? Well, first, we should try to refuse and reduce items in general before we buy something new. Do you need that compostable bag, or can you rinse your kitchen bin and bucket after dumping it into your backyard bin? Could you use a pooper scooper instead of that compostable doggy bag? Or can you reuse a plastic one that you have from the groceries instead of buying a compostable one, if we don't have the proper facilities for that? The other thing, you could visit the website, the BPI website I had put on there, for more information about the item you are buying, if you need it. They actually have a link on there to choose, to put in the SKU number of the item that you have, to check if it is actually certified compostable, or if the company is actually doing what they say they're doing. I tried that out with a compostable item I have, and was shocked that the company is actually not registered with them, and so they're actually not certified like they say they are. So it's really interesting to go there and to see. One company that I would recommend, they're not paying us for this. This is not an endorsement, but if you are curious and you want to get proper products, Canada Green, right here in Winnipeg, they sell certified compostable products by BPI here. And the other part of that is, if you buy those items, make sure that you choose the proper end of life for them. Like I said earlier, you can't put them in your backyard bin, but if you have Compost Winnipeg pickup service, or if you're bringing them to a large-scale compost system, they can actually accept those materials because they're going to be properly broken down with higher heat and more oxygen. And our Compost Winnipeg service will pick up those items. They deal with Canada Green all the time. So if you have an event, or if you have pickup for your office, those products are fine to use. And if you want to do your part for the environment. And lastly, if you can't reduce and you need something, try to get something that you can reuse. Choose a reusable option. So if you like getting takeout, or if you're always on the run and you get takeout, don't reach for or don't ask for those plastic cutlery or compostable cutlery, keep a metal fork or a bamboo fork with you all the time, and just wash that and reuse that. Little things like that can really help quite a bit. I hope I've cleared things up with compostable plastics. They can be quite confusing, but with learning a little bit more through BPI and listening today, I hope that you can make more informed choices about using these items. And it's not bad to use them. We just need to figure out which ones we can use properly and how we use them, or how we get rid of them at the end. I've taken a lot of your time and we still have to talk about recycling. So I'm going to let Colleen and Sarah dive into a little bit more about recycling myths and what you can and can't recycle here. So, but before that, if there's any questions, I'd love to try and answer those. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leah. And that was, I think it's really important to cover the confusion amongst the different types of compostable plastics out there.
Yeah, they can definitely be confusing.
Definitely, yeah. So far, we don't have, no questions have been coming in about compostable products. So I think we can just go ahead and dive into Colleen's presentation. And we have a lot of questions about recycling, so we can get into those after her presentation. And if some come in during, then we can answer those during her presentation as well.
Great.
So I'll hand it over to Colleen.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Leah, for that informative presentation on composting. So now I will be speaking on recycling myths addressed, and also just what can really be recycled in Winnipeg and in Manitoba. And we have Sarah here to help me out with any questions that you might have. And I'm very glad because I have learned a lot from her just with all my research I've been doing as well. So also the importance of recycling is to divert waste from the landfill. Of course, we generate a lot of waste with the products that we consume, and doing anything that we can is always better than having it pile up in the landfill and leach into our soil. Recycling is an energy intensive process. So at Green Action Center, we do advocate for reduction and overall waste reduction included in that. So we'll be talking a little bit about all of that throughout this presentation. So what can we recycle in Winnipeg? And we are speaking about Winnipeg and Manitoba specifically, just because areas, different provinces all over Canada do handle and manage their waste differently. So things that are accepted here may not be accepted elsewhere. Things that are accepted in BC or Saskatchewan a lot of times are not accepted here. So looking into plastics, you'll notice that each plastic has a number on it surrounded by the commonly known recycling symbol. And here in Winnipeg and Manitoba, we accept the numbers 1 through 5 and number 7 plastics. I will get into what the numbers mean a little bit later. And this is with exception to black plastic. Because as I was doing some research, I was looking into the black plastic, and it actually is labeled number 5. And unfortunately, that is not recyclable here, as it does not get sorted through on the scanners properly. Also thinking of plastics, we do not accept foam or plastic bags. Those are things, plastic bags you may be able to take back to your local retail store, grocery store these days. I know a lot of those programs have stopped due to COVID, but that is something we hope to see again in the future. And where you want to bring these to otherwise, I always advocate for reusing. So as Leah had mentioned picking, if you're getting takeout, to pick somewhere something that you can reuse again. But again, if you're just piling up and have a whole inventory of these, it's also not beneficial if you're just hoarding them all. But reusing them and rethinking of what you can do with them is better than them going to the landfill. Of course, we also accept paper here in Manitoba. And so this is things like office paper, envelopes, and the envelopes can include the windows if you have them, the little plastic windows, or without. Telephone books, greeting cards that aren't flashy or glossy or have little glitters on them. And receipts, store receipts, paper bags, and brown paper like that. And it does not include paper towel. That is something that you can put in your compost, as Leah was going over. It also doesn't include things like tissue paper or decorative things, facial tissues, and disposable like coffee cups, those kind of things that are lined with plastic. Unfortunately, those are not recyclable. Glass is accepted, clear colored jars, containers, things like that. And this is like anything from your food containers, what you find your salsa, your oil in, those kind of things, as long as you rinse them out. What's not accepted is glassware, dishes like from your kitchen, broken glass, mirrors, and light bulbs, and things like that. Broken glass is never a great thing to put into your recycle bin, as it's also a harmful item that could affect the workers who are dealing with it. And so for there, you'd want to rethink, reuse. If it's broken, then safely dispose of it in a container that can go to the landfill. We accept, or in Manitoba, it accepts all beverage containers made of like cartons and juice boxes without the straws, things like that. And you see those bins everywhere to try and promote recycling beverage containers wherever you are. What is not accepted is batteries. These are things that you can bring to your local hardware store. Though a lot of places will take batteries for to recycle. So Canadian Tire, Home Depot, I believe, Staples, and you can always call before you recycle as well. And then we also do not accept electronics, but these can be taken to local 4R depots or local e-waste recycling drop-off spots as well. Right. And this is a image from the city that shows what is accepted in your blue bin and what is not. So under yes, we have the plastic bottles, containers, generally clear, hard plastic. Clear or hard plastic is accepted, and then of course not black plastic. For glass, the general glass that I had gone over, metal, aluminum, those are all great. Pizza boxes is listed down here, but we want to make sure that we are not including dirty pizza boxes, so soiled pieces of it. That can get ripped up and go into your compost easily. And just trying to think of ways to rethink how we can do that is great. So not accepted here in metal also includes pots and pans, like I said, kitchenware, coat hangers, the little metal wire ones. And a big one is polystyrene down here, which is foam, styrofoam. And that is like packing peanuts, a lot of packaging, cups, takeout containers. And so it's always best just to rethink of the places you're going to and if they still use these products, or if you're ordering something and it's going to come in those with a bunch of packing peanuts or something like that, maybe opting for something that's a little better quality and something that you can dispose of better or reuse better. These are some items that are not accepted that are commonly found in the blue bin, and this causes issues down the stream, as well as just takes up more time and resources for the sorting facility. So a very common one is black plastic. Wrapping paper, this is not accepted as it's very glossy and has non-recyclable ingredients in it. Saran wrap, plastic film, so all that flimsy plastic bags, as you mentioned, polystyrene, which is number 6 plastic, disposable coffee cups, tin foil, unfortunately, disposable metal pie plates and roasting pans, and plant pots and trays. So these last two, it's really important just to reuse as much as you can when you can. Plant pots and trays, you can contact your local garden center. A lot of them will take them back to reuse them for another season. And for our depots, we'll take them back as long as they are not black plastic as well. And unfortunately, black plastic, as I mentioned, just doesn't reflect light, so cannot be sorted by the scanners in the sorting facility. And so this is a screenshot of the page from the city of Winnipeg of items that are accepted for our depots. So anything that you might not be able to bring into your blue cart, which is just at the top here, like newspaper, household cardboard, plastic containers, glass jars. You can find in this list of where you can bring it and what it can be used for. So this includes things like glass that would not be able to go in your blue cart, like glassware frames, broken glass, windshields. They also take your leaf and yard waste in the changing of the seasons. And there's a whole list like that I couldn't even include in here. So just rethinking that, things like tires and paint, hazardous like materials in your household that you might be holding on to and don't want to throw out. You can take a ride down to your local 4R depot. And then we get into contamination. So I know that a lot of stats out there mention how what we put into the blue bin, not a lot actually gets recycled. And that is an issue, a big issue with how our recycling system works. But contamination is that any non-recyclable item that is placed into the recycling bin can be considered contamination. And it can have far-reaching, long-lasting effects. And it can make these recyclables no longer able to be processed and does pose a further risk to others. So generally, we like to say that you should rinse out your food and beverage containers. You don't really want any organic matter going into your recyclables. What I've learned from Sarah, and I think she can touch on this a little bit, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% in the residential system. So if you want to go over that, Sarah, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, no, and just in general, we want to make sure that the containers are as empty as possible. If residents can give a quick rinse, that's always great. The big thing is that there aren't, half full containers. The issue is if that liquid or that food spills out onto paper or cardboard products, it essentially makes them worthless. So when we talk about contaminating other products, it's mostly fiber products from, these food materials. So, a quick rinse, great. Doesn't have to be squeaky clean, but use common sense.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. And can I pause for some questions that have been coming in?
Sure.
Okay, so this is a question that I always struggle with, and this came in and someone actually just asked it now. When recycling bottles or jars with lids, should we put the lids back onto the jar or the bottle when we recycle it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So regarding plastic lids, we 100% want them put back on the containers. The issue being if the lids are thrown in the blue bin separately, they just get lost in the sorting process and they end up not actually being recycled. So at least if they're attached to the container, they will be recycled. Glass and metal lids is a little bit tricky. And in terms of education for recycling, it's a challenge because there's a lot of gray area. So in general, we say keep all of your lids on all of your containers. However, in Winnipeg right now, and this is a recent change, metal lids or steel is being baled separately. So if the metal lid, let's say it breaks off and there's pieces of glass still stuck to the lid, it can create, issues down the stream. In general, we say put the lids back on the container for metal, but if a resident chooses to leave it off, that's fine as well.
Okay, so basically leave the lids on unless it's a metal lid, then you can leave it off of the container.
Right. And again, there's so much gray area when you're doing mass education. So we typically say all the lids on containers, but because we're talking to the 1% probably today who, are really avid composters and recyclers, which is fantastic, I would leave them off.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. And then I guess just for one more question, that kind of leads to, are there certain sizes of materials that are just too small to be recycled? Like what is too small?
Oh, that's a good question. Bottle caps are, of course, something that I would automatically go to and say it would be too small. It would get lost. So other small items, trying to think of other ones off the top of my head. But again, you have to remember these sorting facilities are massive. There's, different conveyor belts everywhere, tons of different equipment. And we don't want things to get lost as they're getting processed. We want to make sure that everything is recycled. And going back, to what you were saying earlier, Colleen, there are a lot of negative news stories out there saying that, just such a small percentage of, the material that is collected is being recycled. In Manitoba, we have between a 5 and a 15% contamination rate. So there's approximately 5 to 15%, depending on what community someone is living in, that is actually going to landfill once it's collected. And that could be from it just simply being contaminated, like we talked about the fiber materials, or it being items that are not actually accepted in the residential program. So that's all included in that 5 to 15%. But I would be confident as a consumer, as a resident, knowing that, at a minimum, 85% of the material collected is being recycled and sent to end markets.
That's helpful to hear. That's encouraging to hear. Yeah. We have some other questions coming in, but we have a question saying that they've heard that plastic lids are heavier plastic than the containers. So they have different burn points and should be removed.
So we do want plastic lids kept on containers. Typically lids are made of a mixed plastic. I can't speak exactly to the processing side of it, but that is what our processor in Winnipeg wants, and that's what the other processors in the province are asking for.
Okay, then that's what they're asking for. Then I guess that's what we do, hey? Okay, great. There's more questions coming in, but I'll let Colleen get back to her presentation, and then we can pick up with questions a little later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
We don't have too much more to go, so we will get to answering all your questions right away. One thing that I want to note is that even though a item might have the common recycling symbol that we see, it may not be accepted in Manitoba. So when these products are made, a lot of times they're made on a large scale for a lot of different areas of the world. And so it may not adhere to our systems here. So what do the numbers mean? So this is an example of the numbers that you may see on your plastic items. So number one, PET, sometimes known as PETE, is plastic food and beverage containers. So on this ketchup bottle here, a lot of items you'll probably find in your fridge, anything like that. And those are recyclable. Just give them a rinse and, as Sarah mentioned, put the lid on. HDPE number two, that's high density polyethylene. And so this is the thicker plastic that comes in like jugs, and you'll notice it on your laundry detergent and other big jugs that you might have, cleaning products. Also recyclable with a good rinse. I skipped number three because I didn't have a nice picture, but number three is polyvinyl chloride, which is used in a lot of plastic products. Number 4, 5, and 7 are other plastics. So a lot of this is the bottom of a Tim Hortons cup here. That's a number 5. And then number 7 here is just a cat food container. So just the miscellaneous plastics there that are accepted in Manitoba. And then number 6, this is what we don't accept. This is the polystyrene. So comes in your packaging, your coffee cups, your takeout containers, and we just want to avoid that as much as we can. Or if you're creative, find some way to reuse it. So what now? We want to refuse, reduce, and rethink. Those are 3 extra R's that we add to or I guess 2 extra R's, a few extra R's that we add to the whole reduce, reuse, recycle. And the big one that I like to advocate for is refuse. Refusing and then being prepared for it. So as Leah said, saying no to the plastic cutlery and bringing your own metal fork. And that is just having a little bag and having it in your purse or your backpack or in your car or whatever it is that you have on you most of the time. Having just a little pouch of that so that you're always ready to say no. And refusing things like straws, refusing plastic bags, bringing your own, or just incorporating those little habits into your life. And Green Action Center believes that eliminating the unsustainable use of resources requires the adoption and implementation of a waste reduction priority, which emphasizes the elimination of waste and advocates appropriate strategies that include reduction at the source, reuse, recycling, and resource recovery, and in that order. This is one of the key fundamental principles of our organization. And we also like to focus on plastic prevention. And also through the Living Green, Living Well program, I represent the plastic waste reduction program, which is why a large part of this recycling presentation is devoted to plastics. And they are a big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions with all the fossil fuels we use. So very important to keep them down. So moving on to prevention. Disposable plastic is cheap and convenient. So our use of it has gone way up to the point where recycling is just no longer enough. We need a different approach that turns our attention to the top of the waste reduction hierarchy. And we want to focus on prevention first and think of recycling as our last option, because diverting it from the landfill is great, but it is still creating that waste in the process. Another issue is that the rules about where to go do vary, as Sarah mentioned, that they are generally around the same all around Manitoba, but it does vary whether you're at home, at work, in a public space. The residential system can vary from the recycle everywhere containers that you see or bins that you see out. And so just recycling where you are, rinsing out your products and bringing them home. We always advocate for packing in, packing out, wherever you go. Take your recycling and your trash and bring it back. Because if you're doing it in a public space, you're kind of just handing it off for someone else to deal with your waste there. And as a result of this, often even the best informed citizens don't know how to recycle properly. And that's why it's all a learning process. Even for myself and my colleagues at Green Action Center, we're always learning of what we can recycle and how we can best reduce our waste. Right. And so here you'll see a bunch of bananas in a plastic bag, which you often see in the store. Whether it's that or it's they have their stickers on them, they're close together with a plastic ring. Everywhere you go, you hear about the plastic pollution problem, and solving this problem won't solve climate change, that's for sure. To reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we do need to focus on many other issues, but reducing the amount of plastic that we use and the waste that we produce will have a positive impact, and it is something that we can act on now. So the question really is, why not? And so one of the ways that you can easily see what you can recycle where is checking out MMSM's Recyclepedia. I was on there quite a bit before this presentation to get all the information I needed for all of you. And it's really simple. You just go to their website and they have their little Recyclepedia option. You type in the name of the item you want. You could type in plastic bags. You can type in a number that you see on the container. You can type in like anything from glass, cardboard. It's really awesome. And then if it's recyclable in your blue bin, it'll let you know. If it's recyclable at a 4R depot, it'll give you all the resources you need, as well as if it has to go to the landfill. So that's really, really cool and a really neat tool to use if you're ever stuck. And now I will pass it off and also help with the Q&A here, as I know we have a lot of questions that we'd like to get answered.
Thanks for the great information, Colleen. That was really helpful. And I really like the thought of bringing your recyclables home with you instead of putting them in a public bin, because we've definitely seen public recycling bins, and they're usually very contaminated. So that's a great idea. I never actually thought of that. So yeah, we have a lot of questions coming in. I guess kind of on the side of small items, someone asked about coffee pods, like the Keurig coffee pods. I'm almost positive that they're not recyclable due to they're made out of a variety of different materials. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah, so they're not accepted for the reason being they're very small. They get lost in the sorting facility. So that's another great example of a small item. They're made of mixed plastic. And then the third issue is, a lot of residents won't take the time to empty the grounds out of the pods, making them a contamination issue at the MRF. So there's multiple reasons. There are a few programs. I believe TerraCycle has a program. A lot of the actual, like the manufacturers, Keurig and I don't even use these. I don't even know what they're called. Nespresso. They all have their own kind of take back programs. So just go on their website and see if you can get a box and collect them over a period of time. And then you can send them back to the company so they'll be recycled.
Oh, that's good to know. And there's also like the reusable cups that you can use as well. So that's another option. Yeah. And on kind of the small side of things still, people were wondering if receipts and sticky notes are recyclable. I've always thought that receipts were not recyclable because they have that waxy finish, but I'm always confused about that. And same with sticky notes because they have the glue on the back too. So
receipts can be recycled. If you have a sticky note, I would recommend cutting off the sticky part, throwing that in the garbage, and then recycling the rest of the piece of paper. So going that extra step.
Wow. Okay. So I've been throwing out my receipts all this time. Okay. Well, someone had a question about glass breakage. So, if you have glass bottles that you put in the blue bin and are thrown into the recycling truck, probably some of it breaks. Does that matter? I guess, what is the end product? Like, how is the glass used? And is it okay if it is broken?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. Fortunately, very little actually gets broken from the collection to the processor, that transportation piece. So
Hmm.
the paper and the plastic in the truck actually acts as a little bit of protection for the glass. And then most collection contracts are restricted on how much compaction the truck is allowed to generate when collecting residential materials.
Oh.
So that's really helpful. Obviously, some does get broken in the process, and it's all sorted. Like again, we talked about the equipment, and the MRF is super sophisticated, and it goes through a lot of different checkpoints before it ends up at a station where there would be staff manning the belt. But again, we want to be really careful. This is a hazard for people working in these facilities, so we want to keep that in mind. Therefore, not putting broken glass in the blue bin. So
That's a good point. Yeah. So if we have broken glass, we should either bring it to a 4R depot or throw it in the garbage, but preferably the 4R depot.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great. Oh, this is an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever seen this before. Someone was wondering if we can recycle items with the European recycling symbol. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Sarah. It's a circle symbol. I don't know if you've seen that before.
No,
So
I
sometimes
haven't.
there's no other information on the plastic, just that circle symbol.
Yeah, I think, and this is, something that we all need to remember, that even if there's a recycling symbol on it, doesn't mean that it's accepted in your program. So I'm not sure what this European symbol is, but I would assume that it would be the same thing. Maybe it's saying that this material is, recyclable, but is it actually recyclable in your program, in your city? So check the Recyclepedia. It's also available as an app. So residents can download the app for free. It comes in 13 languages, and really easy to, figure out or determine what goes in your recycling bin in your city.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is just because it has the recycling symbol on it, it doesn't mean it's recyclable here. You just have to be aware of what follow the guides that are provided to know what numbers are taken here. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Tetra Paks. There's the juice boxes, you have the soup and the soup broths that come in Tetra Paks. I hear that they are recyclable, but then I always think maybe they're not because they're made out of multiple materials. Are they recyclable?
No, they are 100% recyclable. So put them in your bins, just make sure they're empty first.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I think we can all kind of comment on this. Someone was saying that she actually makes her own peanut butter. So she buys, assuming peanuts in bulk, and she buys them with a plastic bag. So she's wondering if it's better to buy the peanut butter and recycle the container that the peanut butter comes in than buying the peanuts in bulk. And I would just say there's actually places like Bulk Barn where you can go and bring your own containers or your own bags, like reusable cotton bags, to put the peanuts in, so you don't actually have to worry about using those plastic bags. So I'd say that'd be your answer. And during COVID, Bulk Barn stopped allowing people to bring their own containers, but now they're allowing people to do that again, which is really exciting. So yeah. So I'd say that's the best. The option is to still make your own peanut butter and just bring your usable bags to put your peanuts in. Okay, so someone is saying she buys laundry soap in a metal tin and it's steel. Can that be recycled in the blue bin, or should that actually be brought to the 4R depot?
Yep, that can go in the blue bin. If in general, again, there's always exceptions to the rule, but we always want to put packaging in the blue bin, not products. So not laundry baskets, but obviously laundry soap comes in packaging. So yes, steel is accepted, and it's packaging. So for sure it could be put in the blue bin.
Okay, so if it's packaging, it's fine, but say like random metal pieces. So like metal nails and screws, or let's say a shelf bracket or
Right.
other scrap pieces of metal, that's not okay to put in your blue bin.
Right, so that would be considered a product. So we don't want to put that in the blue bin. It also poses, considerable risk to the MRF and the equipment there. So we have to be mindful of that as well. If you think about, a large piece of metal going through the system and breaking down, one of the sections of the MRF, it could cause a backlog of material. And you have to think there's like a football field of material coming in there every day. So that can, those significant delays could cause a big challenge.
That's a really good point, because my husband and I were just talking about why you can't put random metal pieces in your blue bin, but I guess it's the same as you shouldn't put broken glass in your blue bin. It's a big safety issue, really.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, actually, yeah. So someone actually wrote a very great comment, and I actually buy this too. You can buy laundry detergent that comes in. It's actually laundry detergent strips from True Earth, and they come in a cardboard box or just in a little paper sleeve, and so you can avoid the plastic laundry detergent bottles, which is great. Something that I learned at a conference was like, obviously we know that black plastic isn't accepted, but even when you have, your shampoo bottles, your laundry detergent bottles, they're usually colored plastic, like purple or orange. Those don't have much of a market because you can't really change the color of that plastic. Is that true? Like, are they not really recycled as much as, say, white plastic would be?
That I'm not 100% sure on, but I do know that like colored HDPE, so that's colored number two rigid plastics,
Yeah.
are actually a very high value item in the blue bin.
Oh.
So they have a high commodity value. So I would say that, yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to the difference between the clear and the colored, but I know that it's a material that, we do want. So.
Okay, that's actually really good to hear. That's what's so confusing about recycling, is there's lots of, depending on who you talk to, and I guess depending on where the materials are going,
Yeah, well, it depends where you live. And, at the end of the day, recyclables are commodities. They're bought and sold like anything else. And I just wanted to clarify a point on the black plastics, because I think that the negativity around, the conveyor belt color being the big issue, and the sorting process, where as there's just a really limited end market for black plastic. So it's not an easy plastic that can be collected, baled, and sold. So that's more of the issue than let's just change all of the conveyor belts. But then what else are the scanners not going to be able to see? What other color, like what color is it going to be? So,
yeah.
you know what, there's so many challenges, and the technology is getting better all the time. But at the end of the day, if we don't have an end market, we can't collect it.
Well, and I think that goes back to just really reducing your consumption of plastic, because recycling isn't the answer. It's just another thing that we can do.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, totally. Oh, we have a question asking about clear plastic food containers, like ones that are normally recyclable, but are they acceptable if they have a sticky label on them? So I'm thinking of the clamshells where you have the raspberries and strawberries that come in and they have the sticky labels on them and inside them.
Yeah, so the labels on the outside that are, probably the brand logo, those are fine.
Okay.
I would peel out the like styrofoam, like for example, in raspberry containers, they have like sticky styrofoam piece at the bottom. Pull that out. I don't even know what that material is, but I'm assuming it's not going to help the recycling process. So I always remove mine.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I do too. Yeah. And I did wonder about the sticky labels on the outside. So that's good to know that they're okay.
Yeah, you don't have to peel it off. We want recycling to be convenient for consumers. And you know what, if we have to go through all these different steps, We will do those things, but there is a large portion of the population that won't. So we want it to be as easy and convenient for them as possible.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Another question is, when you receive mail from a bank or an organization and you have that clear plastic window that shows your address, your name and your address, do you have to remove that clear plastic from the envelope before recycling it, or?
Nope, it can go in as one whole.
Oh,
Yeah. So
oh,
don't worry
that's
about
great.
that.
I don't have to do that anymore. Leah's nodding too. I've also noticed that, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I've noticed that there's takeout containers that are compostable, but they always also say they're recyclable. So they look more like a paper product, but it'll have like the compostable plastic lining. I'm assuming that's not recyclable here. I'm not sure if you've come across that, Sarah.
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of different, companies are trying to be creative with, the packaging that they are coming up with, but it's not always, the best solution. So, for example, throwing a compostable plastic item into the blue bin is considered contamination because it can't be recycled with regular plastics. So there is that challenge. They're not accepted in the blue bin, obviously. So yeah, it's a challenge that processors are facing, and I think we're going to see more of that as more companies do move to more compostable options, especially because consumers have a hard time figuring out what the difference is. So how do we as educators mold the messaging so it's accurate and the processors are happy and the materials not ending up in the landfill? So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like the education always has to be evolving with the new packaging that's coming out. So it is really tricky. Well, one other thing that we get this question a lot, I think you probably comes up in your discussions, is why don't we have a system here in Manitoba where people can return their beverage containers for a refund or to get a deposit back instead of just putting them in your blue bin?
Yeah, so we obviously get that question a lot. So in other provinces that have it, it's called a deposit system. Consumers are paying about 15 cents per container. And then when they return that container, they're getting about 10 cents back. And this is just in general. So they're still 5 cents out of pocket at the end of the day. But the issue is when you remove, let's say, beverage containers, you're removing the most valuable items out of the blue bin. So your aluminum cans, your plastic bottles, these are the highest value items that we're collecting, which then in turn makes our residential recycling program that much more expensive. So in Manitoba, our program, we fund up to 80% of a municipality's recycling program. So producers would have to charge consumers more money, or our taxes would go up just to create the deposit system, which then makes recycling less convenient. So now consumers are having to drive to drop their containers off. It costs more money right at the till when we're buying buying whatever we're buying. And then it makes the whole recycling system that much more expensive. Plus, you have to set up the program because we don't have one currently in Manitoba, which would cost tens of millions of dollars. So there's a lot of challenges around it. I can't see us going in that direction. To me, it doesn't make sense because at the end of the day, we want recycling to be easy and convenient.
Well, and I guess it puts the onus on individuals to have to go and return their beverage containers somewhere as well, instead of just throwing it in your blue bin and it's done with.
Yeah. And with inflation right now, food, you think about things at the grocery store and how much more they're already costing. It would cost that much more to buy groceries, and, the trickle down effect to people, and some people just couldn't take that. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. Okay. Oh, we have a comment that came in about the discussion of compostable containers and how it really highlights the benefits of having commercial scale composting available to everyone in Winnipeg. So, and it just allows us Winnipeggers or Manitobans to be able to use more environmentally friendly packaging, which we don't really have an end use for it or a place for that to go. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're almost at our end point here. A lot of the other questions that we had are just kind of wondering where to bring, a 3-ring binder for recycling, or where to drop off clothing for recycling, like textiles that aren't good enough to be donated to a thrift store, or small household appliances. So again, a great place to bring those, a lot of those items are to the 4R depot, so you can check to see what they accept. And we actually have a really great blog called, of course, I forget what it's called. Leah, do you remember? You wrote the blog.
Yeah, it's the What Goes Where, I believe.
Yes, What Goes Where. It actually covers a lot of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Getting Rid of guide. I'm gonna post it.
I always mix up. I wrote it and I mix up the title. No,
it was a long time ago.
yeah, it was. But we are gonna expand on it too, because we keep getting a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of great questions, and on those more obscure items. So if you go to the guide, it has like audio equipment that you can still use that isn't junk, or the mattresses to Mother Earth, or like it goes through more of those random non-blue bin items. So we're definitely going to be expanding on that because we did a lot more research. But yeah, check it out.
Yeah, so it's a nice place to look to answer all those questions instead of having to Google and search for all of that. All right, well, I think that's all for questions that have been coming in. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to our webinar and for asking all those really great questions. I actually learned a lot from this webinar, and I hope everyone else tuning in was able to learn some new things. And I really want to thank Sarah for coming and joining us. That was really helpful. It's nice to have someone who is involved with recycling instead of us trying to answer your recycling questions. So that was really great.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So again, we have one more webinar coming up today at 7 p.m. So you can go to our website to register for that if you want to learn how to build some wooden compost bins. And you can go on to Green Action Center's Facebook page to check out the videos of our other webinars that we had earlier on this week. And so did someone raise their hand? Someone raise their hand? Saw it happen, but if you have, it was an error. Okay. False alarm. All right. So want to say thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you again for the City of Winnipeg for supporting this webinar series, and enjoy the rest of your week and have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Yep. Thanks for joining.